The Roman Republic. Would-be king, a tyrant poised to extinguish the flame of liberty. The title of Rex, or king, was anathema to the Roman spirit, a reminder of the tyrannical monarchy overthrown centuries before. Caesar's populist reforms, while popular with the common people, further alienated the conservative senatorial class. He reformed the calendar, offered land to his veterans, and extended citizenship, actions that bypassed traditional senatorial authority. An incident at the Lupercalia festival, where Mark Antony offered Caesar a diadem, only for him to refuse it, was seen by many as a carefully staged piece of political theater. The suspicion remained that he was merely testing the public's appetite for a king. It was in this climate of paranoia and political crisis that a conspiracy began to form. Gaius Cassius Longinus, a talented but bitter man who held a personal grudge against Caesar, was a principal architect of the plot. Cassius understood that for the act to be seen as a noble defense of the Republic, it needed a symbol of unimpeachable integrity. He found that symbol in Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was a man widely respected for his honor and his lineage, tracing his ancestry back to the very founder of the Republic who had expelled the last king. He was also a close friend of Caesar, a man who had pardoned him after the Civil War and elevated him to high office. This created a profound internal conflict for Brutus, tearing him between personal loyalty and his perceived civic duty. Cassius masterfully exploited this conflict, leaving anonymous notes for Brutus to find, urging him to act for the sake of Rome. Of liberty. The conspirators, calling themselves the Liberators, swelled to a number of around 60 senators. They chose the Ides of March, March 15th, for their deed. This was the day of drew his dagger, He lunged forward and struck a glancing blow to Caesar's neck. Caesar, startled, spun around and cried out, "Vile Casca, what is this you do?" He fought back, stabbing Casca in the arm with his stylus, a sharp writing instrument. But then the other conspirators swarmed him, a flurry of flashing daggers. He was completely encircled, with no hope of escape. He saw faces he knew, men he had pardoned, men he had promoted. Then, through the chaos, he saw him, Marcus Junius Brutus. It was at this moment of ultimate betrayal that Caesar is said to have uttered his final, heart-wrenching words. While Shakespeare immortalized the phrase as "et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus," historians suggest his actual words may have been different. The Roman historian Suetonius reported that he said in Greek, "Kai su, teknon," which translates to "you too, my child." This phrasing suggests an even deeper, almost paternal bond between Caesar and Brutus, making the betrayal all the more devastating. Other accounts claim he said nothing at all, simply pulling his toga over his head to meet his end with dignity. Regardless of the betrayal. It captures the profound shock of being wounded by a trusted friend, a pain deeper than any physical injury. The conspirators' act, born of high-minded ideals, ultimately failed to achieve its goal. Instead of restoring the old order, it accelerated its final collapse. The power vacuum they created was filled not by the Senate, graveyard of the Republican ideal. Cassius's suicide was based on a mistaken